Today we're going to talk about the potential for a widespread, deadly pandemic and what you can do to prepare for it. Let's get to it. The Global Preparedness Monitoring Board is an independent body assembled by the World Health Organization. They indicate that there is a growing risk of a worldwide pandemic that will kill tens of millions of people. This type of pandemic could occur naturally, or it could be a bioweapon that was deliberately created. It could even be accidentally released from a research facility. Managing a disaster of this nature is not as simple as managing a benign threat like a hurricane, a cyber attack, or a direct attack on critical infrastructure. The effects of pandemic are far-reaching and prolonged. The gradual collapse of social systems could last months, even years. For this reason, preparing for the next great global pandemic involves serious planning and a long-term commitment that goes well beyond the 72-hour emergency kit. Factors that are making a pandemic of this magnitude more likely are the following: crowded living conditions in urban areas, the increased amount of research on pathogens, and thus the increased potential for a mistake to be made in one of these laboratories, the growing risk of bioweapons, and a global transportation grid which moves billions of people around the world at faster speeds every year. While there are these increased risks, there are also some protective factors in the modern age. We now have better detection systems, and we also have prophylactics and better treatment methods, and we can also develop vaccines faster. What kind of features would a super virus like this have? Well, for starters, it would be airborne. That means it could spread through microscopic droplets in the air from person to person. It would be highly contagious during the incubation period, that is, the period in which people are not symptomatic, or when they just have mild symptoms. This allows it to spread under the radar. It would also be a microbe that most people are not immune to, so there would be a large population of susceptible human hosts. It wouldn't have an existing treatment or prevention method, and it would have a very low but significant fatality rate. Now that last one might sound surprising, but consider that the Spanish flu only had a kill rate of 2.5%. This is important from the virus perspective because it allows it to spread longer before killing the host. Nearly 50 million people perished as a result of the Spanish flu, so a virus needn't be very lethal to be disruptive. So when you hear talk of viruses with high lethality rates, this actually may be inhibiting the spread of that particular virus. There is something called the host density threshold theorem, and this is that if a virus kills too many people, it will run out of susceptible hosts and it will quickly be extinguished. How do we assess the threat level of a pandemic? It's important to keep in mind that on average in the United States, the flu kills 30,000 people every year. So while we're seeing these coronaviruses and respiratory illnesses, which indeed are novel and unpredictable, it's just important to keep the numbers in mind before we jump the gun and batten down the hatches and everybody calls in sick for work. For instance, as bad as SARS was, it infected 10,000 people and killed 800 people. As tragic as it was, it didn't entail the end of the world as we know it and was far from being an existential threat to humankind. Now, the media tends to do one of two things. News agencies tend to overestimate the threat in order to attract eyeballs. Government agencies, on the other hand, are tasked with maintaining social order, and they want to minimize panic, and thus they may actually downplay the seriousness of the threat, especially the credible ones. If the government knows that the crap is going to hit the fan, the last thing they want everybody to do is start losing it and panicking, because that makes it much harder for them to maintain the social order. And this makes perfect sense because a breakdown in law and order and people not partaking in society may actually have profoundly negative effects not only on the economy, but it may actually make the spread of the virus even worse. This is why the recent coronavirus in China has prompted the lockdown of several major cities in that country. These cities are under quarantine, which is essentially a form of martial law. All transport systems have been temporarily suspended, and people are being prohibited from leaving these cities. Cordoning off large areas and quarantining whole cities will be something that's implemented worldwide should a virus get out of control. These drastic measures speak to the potential severity of this current outbreak. While something like this might be easily executed in China, many democratic countries around the world will be far more resistant to the idea of quarantining whole cities. The threat of being contained against your will in an area that's ridden with illness isn't going to go over well in a lot of places. many people would try to get out of Dodge. Furthermore, the logistics of pulling something like this off would require immense government resources that most countries, especially during these crises when they have public workers going AWOL, they're simply not going to have the manpower. The Chinese city of Wuhan, where the outbreak was first discovered, is also home to a research laboratory which studies these types of lethal pathogens. If something has escaped this laboratory and the Chinese government has compromised the economy to the extent that it has by shutting down these major urban centers, they must understand the true gravity of the situation. Is this current version of the coronavirus actually a serious threat, or is it being overhyped in the media? Only time will tell. Regardless, we are long overdue for a pandemic of historical proportions. Something to ask yourself is, if a lethal pathogen for which there was no cure was detected and spreading within your city, would you go to work? How many people who work in occupations for which the general public relies would not go into work? This, of course, would be a threat to the stability of our critical infrastructure. Would the government step in then and mandate people to go back to work? Would civil unrest then ensue? Now, there have been some plans by certain governments to provide essential government workers with prophylactics or give them priority treatments so that they can come to work and not worry about getting sick. While the government might view this as a utilitarian argument, the general public may not, and they may in fact protest this. Once again, this could lead to civil unrest. So depending on the length of the disruption of critical services, this could lead to food shortages, power outages, and increased crime, all of which may inadvertently accelerate the spread of this pathogen. How would we prepare for a pandemic of this magnitude? Generally speaking, all of the strategies that we discuss on this channel would apply. Having the appropriate provisions to ride out a 6-month to 1-year societal slowdown caused by a pandemic will greatly reduce the amount of situations you have to put yourself in to surround yourself with compromised people, whether that's going to a crowded grocery store or standing in a lineup to receive government rations. In addition to this, you'd also obviously want to avoid socially congested areas in times of heightened pandemic risk. Airborne droplets from contagious people can travel several feet, so the last place you want to be is utilizing public transportation. Avoiding touching things while you're in public spaces, and depending on the severity of how widespread it is, you may want to use proactive or reactive methods to avoid contracting the illness. A proactive method would be using a N95 mask or an antiviral mask. Most people, unless we're at DEFCON 1, aren't going to be comfortable wearing a half-face respirator or a gas mask around town. A reactive approach would be aggressive and frequent hand washing or carrying around a bottle of hand sanitizer. If a major outbreak does occur, chances are it's going to spread via the major cities of the world first, ones that have international airports. From there, it will diffuse throughout the population. Many rural, isolated communities may altogether avoid coming into contact with these types of pathogens, simply by virtue of the lack of their transient populations. One protective factor of the modern world is that a lot of things nowadays are hands-free. Whether it's just having to tap your debit card, doors that you don't have to open, or paper towel dispensers that you just wave your hand in front of. This type of technology doesn't get enough props for limiting the spread of pathogens, but it's certainly not enough to stop a major pandemic from spreading. Now, a fomite is defined as objects or materials which are likely to carry infections, such as clothes, utensils, and furniture. Fomites act as a medium to transport pathogens from one person to the next. Touchless technology has significantly reduced the amount of fomites within society, but not nearly enough to eliminate the virulent spread of a dangerous disease. In terms of preparedness gear, N95 or N99 masks, which block out 95 to 99% of infectious particulates, can be useful and have been shown to significantly reduce the risk of contracting an illness. Perhaps more importantly, if you are infected, it will minimize the risk of spreading the disease to others. However, the effectiveness of this low-level protective equipment requires a tight seal, something that's impossible with these types of masks. And these masks should be immediately disposed of once you're done using them, because the virus can attach to the exterior of the mask, and then when you take the mask off, you are at risk of coming into contact with a pathogen. Antiviral face masks, on the other hand, do actually neutralize the viruses that come into contact with them. But once again, these do not form a tight seal around the face, and thus there is the potential for airborne particles to enter into your respiratory system. Half masks and gas masks offer much better protection. Half masks are far more cost effective, but they don't offer any eye protection. Gas masks are much longer lasting and they offer better protection. There's also more filter options. Many are CBRN ready, meaning that they resist against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear contaminants, but they certainly cost a lot more. A half mask with good medical goggles is certainly better than nothing. If you do have to engage with sick people or you have to enter a contaminated space, you'll need some sort of protective suit. There are 4 levels of hazmat suit protection. For most pandemic situations, level C will be sufficient. Level C consists of a Tyvek suit and a half mask. Level B consists of a sealed suit with a gas mask, and level A is a fully sealed suit with a self-contained breathing apparatus. Level C is going to be within the means of most people and drastically reduce the chance of contracting an infection. Level B offers even more protection, and Level A, total protection. I've done an extensive video on hazmat suit protection that I'm going to link here. Generally speaking, for pandemic preparedness, disposable Tyvek coveralls, long latex gloves, duct tape, and a respirator will significantly reduce the risk. I would also recommend storing pool shock. This is a chemical agent that's used to purify the water in pools. Basically, it allows you to create bleach. You can use that bleach to disinfect potentially contaminated areas. If you are using a level 2 suit like the Haz suit, then you're going to need a decontamination procedure for this suit. That would have to consist of decontaminating the suit with bleach after you're done using it. Another essential part of your preparedness kit should be biohazard bags and biohazard stickers. This is a great way of identifying and making others aware of biohazardous materials. It's important to identify potentially hazardous material, as viruses can stay active on surfaces for days. In addition, in times of the breakdown of rule of law, these can also be used as threat deterrents, because even the dumbest of thieves is likely going to want to avoid a potentially contaminated area during a pandemic. Other useful tools are contactless infrared thermometers like the ones they use in airports, air purification for your home like HEPA filtration systems. It's also a known fact that viruses don't like humid environments. Keeping the humidity in your home between 50 to 60% can reduce the survival of viruses in the air and on surfaces by 30%. Ultraviolet light can also inactivate viruses. Having ample amounts of food, water, vitamins, anti-diarrhea medication, and medications to help to control the symptoms of these illnesses like Tylenol could be profoundly useful, if not life-saving. You may also want to keep some 4mm plastic sheeting and ample amounts of duct tape in your pandemic preparedness kit. It's very likely that a family member or somebody that you know and love is going to contract the disease. You're going to have to be able to deal with that situation when it arises. You'll have to find a way to care for them. The Urban Prepper did an excellent video on this topic, and I'll post a link in the description below. And lastly, and perhaps most disturbingly, but this is a reality that we'll have to face, you may be tasked with disposing of those who've passed away. You may be burdened with the task of doing this in a sanitary way, which is not going to increase the risk to you or your community. This is because government services may be overwhelmed and may not be able to assist with this immediately. Hopefully you're never faced with a situation like that, but I'm going to post a link to a video in the description that walks you through what you should do if you are presented with that. I'm going to post links in the description to different items that you can use to build your preparedness kit. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching Canadian Prepper-O. The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, your one-stop shop for premium, high-quality, brand-name products that have been tried and tested by myself and other YouTube gear reviewers. My subscribers save 10% off by using the coupon code SURVIVALPREPPER, all one word in all caps.